In the last video, we set up our unique IDs. In this one, we're going to wire up our inputs to actually do something meaningful using the unique ID. We're going to start by wiring up the remove button for our note application. I'm going to switch out the files. I'll close down all of the to-do app ones, and we're going to crack open these three for the notes application. And the real thing we're trying to focus on is to start by adding an event handler to that button. This is the button we care about. Now, the button itself actually gets created in this generate note DOM function. Right here, we define our button element. So if we want to add an event listener, we can add it on right here. I'm going to keep things in their own little groups. So under the comment related to the button, we're just going to use button.add event listener. The event listener we're trying to add is the click event listener, and then we're going to set up our function. Now, for our functions, we typically don't need access to the e-event argument, though it does exist, because we just care if the button did or did not get clicked. And we know it got clicked because our function is executing. So I can leave that unnamed if I don't plan to use it, although either way works. Inside of here, we can now run some code for each button click. So for the moment, I am going to use console.log, and I'm just going to dump the note to the screen. So every time we click the button, we should see that note object printing in the console. So if I click the first one, we should see the first object. I'm going to click that X right here. We got the note with an ID starting with 76. If I click the second X, we have a note with the ID starting with FF. And if I click that last X, we have the note starting with 04. So at this point, we do have access to the notes ID via the note.id property. All we really need to do is remove it from the notes array and then call save notes with the newly modified array. Now at this point, we could write all of the code inside of this callback function, or we could take all of the code that is involved with removing a note and break it out into its own function that we call right here. And that's the approach that we're going to take. So let's go ahead and see what that might look like, even though the function we're about to call doesn't yet exist. I would call remove note or something like that, and I would pass in not the title of the note or the position of the note, but the note's ID. So note.id, something truly unique to that note. Now from here, after we've removed the note, we're also going to go ahead and re-render the list. So I'll call render notes, passing in the latest notes array and the latest set of filters. So now all we really need to do is create and actually fill out the remove note function, and this feature should be complete. Up above, we're going to do just that. I'll start with a little comment, remove a note from the list. Then we can set up our function, const remove note. Does remove note, the function, take an argument? Yes, it does. We just set it up to take one, the ID of the note to remove, so I'll call that ID. Inside of here, we are going to target that to-dos array, removing the correct object. There are two things we're going to do in here. First up, we're going to find the index for the note, if any, and then we're going to go ahead and remove it. So let's start with the index, const note index equals, and here we're going to use the find index array method we explored a few sections ago. The array that we're going to call it on is notes. So notes.findIndex, we pass in our function, and remember, this function gets called one time for each item in the array. So in this case, an array of notes, we'll call it note, and we return true when we found the match. The index for that match is what gets set here. So all I'm going to do is we're going to return true when the note ID equals the ID passed into the function. Now we have the note index, and down below, we can focus on removing that note. The first thing we want to do is see if we found a match. If the ID is 0 or above, we did. If it's -1, we did not. So right here, if. I'll check if the note index is greater than -1. If it is, we know we found a match, and we're going to remove it using notes.splice. We're trying to remove it by its index. That's the first argument, note index. How many are we trying to remove? We're just trying to remove one item. Perfect. So there we have it. We now have a system for actually removing the note. Now at this point, we remove the note and we also render notes. We still need to save our notes though, so we can go ahead and do that as well. right here, I can call save notes, passing in the notes to save. There we go. We've taken those 3 actions, modifying it, saving it, and then re-rendering the list. Let's go ahead and actually save all of our files and check if things worked. So I'm going to try to remove that second one. Now at this point, we still don't have a way to change the title or the body for a note. But if I go over here, I can see the second one has an ID of FF. So I would expect that that one goes away after I click the button. I'm going to click the button. And what do we see? We see we have 2 items. The first and second one, neither of them start with FF, which means the correct item did get deleted. If I were to delete the first one starting with 76, I would expect just the one with 04 to exist. I'm going to click that first button. And right here we can see we have a note with the ID of 04. So using the code we just set up, we're now able to actually delete the individual notes, not by their text, not by any property value, not by their position, but by that unique ID. Now that we've done this for the note application, you're going to do the exact same thing for the To-Dos app. Let's go ahead and talk about that one, and then as the next challenge in the next video, we'll focus on that checkbox. Over here, I'm going to open up all 3 files necessary for this one. And I do have a little set of comment directions just to keep you going in the right direction. And I'll just paste those up at the top of this file. Right here, we have those 3 steps. The first thing we have to do is wire up the button we're interested in wiring up. That is the button that shows up next to each to-do. Then you're going to need to remove the to-do by its ID, and then finally save and re-render the list. So take some time to knock this one out, and to make this a bit more challenging, you can go ahead and not refer to the code we just worked on. Keep those notes files closed and try to work from memory. Try to make sure that what you learned is actually sticking so you can apply it to your projects. Pause the video, knock this out, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play. All right, how'd that one go? Hopefully you were able to get that done. I'm going to kick things off by wiring up that button event. So that happens somewhere in this file. Down below, we have generate to-do DOM. Here, we have our checkbox, our text, and at the very bottom, we have our button. This is the one that I'm interested in. I'm going to add something on, remove button dot add event listener. What event are we listening for? It's a button, so we're listening for click. And what are we going to do when the button is clicked? Well, we're going to go through the process in steps 2 and 3. First up is to remove a to-do by ID. Like we did before, I'm going to choose to create a function that gets this done. Remove to-do by ID. And I'll call this one something like remove to-do, though you might have called it something different. I'm going to set up the function. I'm going to set it up to take the ID, and then we're going to go through the process of finding the correct index and removing it. So const to-do index equals, we have our to-dos array. We're going to use the find index function. We're going to pass in our callback function, which gets called with the individual to-do, and we're going to return true when to-do.id equals the ID passed in. Next up, if the to-do index is greater than -1. We know we have a match and we actually want to do something using to-dos.splice. We're going to pass the index in as the first argument. We have that up above, and we're going to pass in the number of things we want to remove as the second. So there we go, a simple remove to-do function all set up. The last things we have to do for step 3 is to save and re-render that list. So down below, right here, first up, let's call the thing we created remove to-do, and let's pass in the ID, to-do.id, which comes from the parent scope right here. Then we are going to save the to-dos, save to-dos, passing in our list. And the final thing we're going to do is render our to-dos. We're rendering this new list with the one item removed, assuming that it did match something. Right here, that's to-dos and filters. Excellent. So this should get the job done, and if I save the file, we can test our work. Over here, I'm going to click this guy trying to remove the to-do with the text of 2, and when I click it, it does indeed go away. And I can also click one of the items with the to-do text of 3 to remove that as well. So now we've started to wire up some of our inputs using that unique ID, and we're headed in the right direction. For the Notes app, we're all done. There was only one input we wanted to wire up. For the To-Dos app, we also have that checkbox. Now the checkbox is a bit trickier. Not only do we want to respond to changes in that checkbox, but we also want to check or uncheck the box when it's initially rendered to make sure that if an item is already complete and a user comes back, it shows up as complete. So for example, over here, if I were to update something in here to have a completed value of true, I would expect that upon a page refresh, one of those items would be checked. We're going to deal with all of that in the next video. It's primarily going to be a challenge video requiring you to use what you've learned here. I'm really excited to get that done because that's going to wire up the last critical feature for the To-Dos application. I'll see you then.